Welcome back. Today, we are jumping headfirst into a massive economic showdown happening in Japan, and trust me, it has huge implications for all of us. It's a fascinating story about a mountain of debt, a diagnosis of an incurable disease, and two completely different ideas for a cure.
All right, so let's get right to the heart of it with this one question. It just sounds completely backwards, doesn't it? Should a government fight rising prices by cutting taxes with money it doesn't have? This single, kind of crazy sounding question is what's splitting economists and politicians right down the middle in Japan. So here's the situation. Folks in Japan, just like everywhere else, are really feeling the pain of rising prices on, everything. And in response, two totally opposite solutions have popped up, pushing the country toward a major decision point. On one side, you've got the active fiscal policy team. Their argument is pretty simple. The government needs to borrow money, whatever it takes, to find tax cuts and help people out right now. But on the other side, you have the fiscal discipline team, and they're screaming, whoa, hold on. They believe that's like pouring gasoline on a fire, and that Japan has to get its enormous debt under control first. This is way more than just a policy debate. It's a fundamental clash of ideas about what a government should even do.
Okay, let's dig into the first argument. This side frames Japan's problem not as just a bad economy, but as a kind of unique and really dangerous illness. And to get what they're saying, we need to take a quick step back in time. Ever since the Nixon shock back in 1971, money isn't backed by gold anymore. Currencies like the Japanese yen are what we call fiat currency. Basically, this just means a government can, in theory, print as much of its own money as it wants. And that realization really set the stage for a very bold experiment in Japan.
That experiment was called Abenomics. The big idea was to make the Japanese yen weaker on purpose. Now, why would they do that? Well, a weak yen makes Japanese products, cars, electronics, cheaper for other countries to buy, which is great for the giant export companies. So the government printed tons of money and took on massive debt to make this happen, hoping all that new corporate profit would trickle down to workers in the form of higher pay. Well, the companies got incredibly rich, but that trickle down, it never really showed up. And that policy created a gigantic side effect. Just look at this number. Japan's government debt is now almost 235% of its entire economy. Let me put that a different way. The government owes more than double what the entire country produces and earns in a single year. That is by far the highest level of debt in the entire developed world. It's just staggering.
Now, according to this first argument, that gigantic pile of debt sets off a painful chain reaction. See, because the debt is so huge, the government can't raise interest rates. If they did, their interest payments would just explode. At the same time, the US is raising its rates, which creates this massive gap. So investors start borrowing Japanese yen for practically free and then buy US dollars to earn that higher interest. It's called a carry trade. This tanks the value of the yen, and suddenly everything Japan has to import costs way more for the average person. And this leads us to this really powerful diagnosis from the economist Atsuhiko Nakata. He calls it an incurable disease without bankruptcy. What he means is, the country isn't going to go broke. It can always just print more yen to pay its bills. The problem is, it has lost control. It has lost its number one tool for fighting inflation, the power to raise interest rates. The Bank of Japan is like a doctor with their hands tied behind their back.
So, if that's the diagnosis, what's the proposed cure from this point of view? Well, they argue you have to treat the disease itself, not just the symptom of high prices.
According to this school of thought, the idea of taking on even more debt to fund tax cuts is just poison. It's basically like giving a bottle of whiskey to an alcoholic. Sure, it might provide some temporary relief, but it just feeds the addiction to debt, and makes the real disease so much worse.
So their plan is something they call reverse Abenomics, and it's pretty straightforward. Step 1, raise taxes on all those big corporations that made record profits from the weak yen. Step 2, take that new tax money and use it to cut taxes for consumers, putting cash right back in people's wallets. And step 3, if there's any money left over, start paying down that mountain of debt. The whole point is to get the debt down so the Bank of Japan can finally be free to act like a normal central bank again.
Okay, but this is where the debate gets really, really good, because there's a powerful counterargument that says that whole diagnosis, it gets the disease and the cure completely, fundamentally backward. So the heart of the rebuttal is this. The problem isn't the debt. It's that the Japanese economy itself is just too weak. They say trying to cure it by raising interest rates now would be the real poison. It'd be like trying to perform major surgery on a patient who's just too frail to survive the operation.
You see, from this point of view, you can't force a sick economy to get better by hitting it with higher interest rates. That would just crush small businesses and families who need to borrow money. They argue that higher interest rates should be the result of a booming, healthy economy that can actually handle them. The order of operations here is absolutely critical.
This table just lays out the two clashing worldviews perfectly. You've got argument A saying the big problem is debt, so more debt is poison. Their solution? Tax corporations, pay down the debt. Then you have argument B saying the big problem is a weak economy, so more debt is actually the medicine. Their solution? Cut taxes with borrowed money, grow the economy, and then worry about the debt later. They're two completely different realities. Now, the rebuttal side also says that all this panic about the debt is way overblown. First off, more than half of it is owned by Japan's own central bank. So when the government pays interest, a huge chunk of it just goes right back to the government. It's like moving money from your left pocket to your right pocket. It's also all in yen, so Japan can't default on it like a country that owes money in US dollars. And finally, they point out that any interest rate hikes would only apply to new debt, not the giant pile that already exists. So, this all leads to a conclusion that is the exact opposite of the first argument. From this perspective, government spending and tax cuts aren't the problem. They are the only solution. The only way to actually handle the debt, they say, is not to shrink the debt, but to grow the economy so big that the debt becomes a much smaller and more manageable piece of the pie.
All of this leaves Japan at a genuine crossroads. And the path it picks isn't just going to shape its own future. It could become a roadmap or a serious warning for the rest of the world. So it really boils down to two very different philosophies. Path number one is the disciplinarian. It says you got to take your medicine, go through some short-term pain to fix the government's finances for long-term stability. Path number two is the stimulator. It says, no, first you have to juice the economy with spending. Grow your way out of the problem, and a bigger, healthier economy will be able to handle the debt just fine.
In the end, what's happening in Japan is so much bigger than just a local political fight. It's a live, real-time experiment testing two fundamental economic theories. And as so many of the world's biggest countries are dealing with their own issues of high debt and slow growth, you can bet they are all watching very, very closely. Is Japan paving a new path forward for all of us, or is this about to become a massive cautionary tale? The answer is being written as we speak.